You do not fear rejection because you are weak. You fear it because, at some point early enough that you cannot name it, rejection felt like it might end you, not embarrass you, end you. That is not a metaphor. For a child who depends entirely on a caregiver for survival, withdrawal of warmth is a threat to existence itself. And the nervous system encoded it that way. It still carries that verdict. There is a specific kind of pain that does not match its trigger. Someone reads your message and does not reply, and something inside you contracts hard. A colleague gives mild criticism in a meeting, and you spend 3 days reconstructing every version of what it might have meant. A person you like seems a little cooler than usual, and your whole internal landscape shifts. You probably know, intellectually, that you are overreacting. That awareness does not make it stop. And that gap between what you know and what you feel is where the primal wound lies. John Bowlby, in his foundational trilogy Attachment and Loss, published across the 1960s and 1970s, described something that has only become more confirmed in the decades since. Human beings are biologically wired to seek closeness with caregivers, and any signal of disconnection activates a survival alarm, not social discomfort, a survival alarm. What Bowlby showed is that attachment is not a preference. It is a biological imperative, no different in its urgency from hunger or cold. What this video will give you is not a way to stop feeling this. It is something more useful, a way to understand why the alarm is so loud, where it was calibrated, and how to stop letting it make your decisions for you. In the early 1970s, Mary Ainsworth developed what became one of the most replicated procedures in developmental psychology, the strange situation. She would bring a child and caregiver into a room, then briefly separate them, then reunite them, and watch closely what happened next. Most children, the securely attached ones, would show distress at separation and then settle quickly on return. But a significant portion showed something that stayed with researchers for decades. Some became intensely anxious and could not be soothed even after the caregiver came back. Others went still and flat, turning away from the very person they needed. Ainsworth called these patterns anxious and avoidant attachment. What surprised me when I first encountered her work is how consistent these patterns are across cultures, across decades, and into adulthood. The children were not making choices, they were adapting. If a caregiver is inconsistently available, the nervous system learns to amplify distress, to make sure the signal is loud enough that it cannot be ignored. If a caregiver is consistently cold or dismissive, the nervous system learns to suppress need entirely because expressing it was never safe. These are not pathologies, they are logical solutions to real problems. The problem is that those solutions follow you out of childhood and into every relationship you try to build. Bowlby called the internal model a child constructs from these repeated experiences an internal working model. It is a prediction machine, given what happened before, here is what I expect now. And it runs almost entirely below conscious awareness. Here is the strange part. The primal wound does not always come from obvious neglect or dramatic abandonment. Sometimes it comes from parents who were kind, but emotionally absent, present in body, unavailable in feeling. Sometimes it comes from a household that was unpredictable, warmth one day, silence the next, with no cause the child could clearly identify. Sometimes it is subtler still. The parent who needed the child to be happy because the parent could not cope with negative emotion. So the child learned to perform okayness and bury everything else. Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, published in 2014, makes a point that is easy to underestimate. He argues that the body stores these adaptive patterns not as memories you can retrieve and examine, but as physical states. Posture, breath, muscle tension, the way your chest closes when a certain emotional signal arrives. The wound does not live in the story you tell about your childhood. It lives below the story, in the somatic layer the story cannot reach. This is why insight alone so rarely resolves it. You can understand your attachment history completely and still feel the same contraction when someone pulls away. The understanding is real. But the nervous system was not educated by understanding. It was shaped by repetition. James Holly's, writing in the middle passage, describes this as the gap between what we consciously know and what the psyche has internalized as truth. What we rationally know can be clear and correct. What the psyche has encoded as a survival template may be decades old and entirely unconscious. In any moment of relational threat, the older signal wins. Understanding the origin does not rewrite the pattern. Repetition does. What the nervous system learned through repeated relational experience, it can also revise through new repeated relational experience. Researchers call this earned security. It is the finding that adults who grew up with insecure attachment can move towards secure attachment through relationships that consistently contradict the old prediction. Bowlby's framework made this possibility conceivable, and decades of attachment research since have confirmed it is real. In practice, this means small and consistent acts carry more weight than dramatic ones. The friend who shows up again after conflict, the partner who stays calm when you test the edges, the therapist who holds the same warmth when you bring something shameful. Each of these is a data point the nervous system quietly collects, not a cure, a correction. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, described the human being's capacity to find new meaning even within suffering that cannot be undone. He was writing about extremity far beyond attachment wounds. But the underlying principle holds. The past does not have to determine the present meaning you make or the present behavior you choose, however loud the old alarm gets. The most useful practice is this. The next time you feel that disproportionate contraction, the one too big for its trigger, pause before acting on it. Not to suppress it, just to notice it. To ask quietly, is this now or is this old? That question is not a solution. But it creates a gap between the signal and the response. In that gap, something genuinely new becomes possible. If you want to keep building that kind of map, the kind that helps you see your own patterns more clearly, this channel exists for exactly that. Subscribe and keep going.